what really strikes me is how, well, the paradox of everything. And not knowing and knowing is a real paradox. Because what I see is on the surface of life, I'm fairly competent, I've read a lot of books, I've written a lot of books, and I can have intelligent conversations about most things, I'm found out eventually, but it takes a while. And I know a lot, and to say I don't is crazy. In fact, I know more all the time. And yet, at the same time, it's all built on this foundation, which isn't there. Because I don't know what life is. I really don't. I have no idea what this is. This incredible adventure is happening. There's this flow of colours and shapes and sounds and feelings all happening, and I don't think anybody knows what it is. In fact, I'm convinced that nobody knows, and that, it seems so important. Wow, we don't know what this is. And the more I look at it, the more it feels it's not like a relative mystery, which we could one day solve. Like, is there life on Mars? Well, one day we could go there, have a good look and go, turns out, guys, there isn't, or there is. The mystery of what life is seems before ideas. So no matter how far our ideas, our knowing goes, the mystery doesn't change. Science is pushed and we know more and we know more and we look, right, what is this, what is this? And then wherever we go, we find we don't know. So we think we know and we know, oh, we know what this is, but what's underneath it? Oh, well, now this isn't really here, for instance. Wow, right, it's not really, so what is there? And we go down until we reach a place where we don't know again. And as the bubble of knowledge expands, there's this infinite field of don't know, this mystery of being. So for me, the secret is, we don't have to pretend we don't know things, we do. But let's remember that also, as well, not instead, but as well, life is the most breathtaking mystery. And this moment right now is, well, more mysterious than you could ever put into words. And when I see that, consciousness changes. When you're just living in what you know, you're in a story that you're telling about life, which is great, we need one. But we're missing the mystery. And when you see the mystery as well, then what I call the mystery experience arises, which is my name for spiritual awakening, really. That, oh, wow. I don't know what this is. And suddenly everything starts to sparkle. It's like you're seeing everything for the first time. You're breathing for the first time. You're seeing colours for the first time. And it's not just, it's whoa, wow. So for me, the mystery is the doorway. And what I love about it, in my new book, The Mystery Experience, I start with that because it takes only a second for nearly anybody to recognise the truth that they fundamentally don't know what life is. And as soon as you see it, the door opens, you step through, and then from then on, you're in a whole new world. For me, the simple doorway in, which, again, anyone can just pick up on, I think, is wonder. If you're not feeling wonder, if you're not wondering at this, you're already kind of half asleep, because this is definitely worthy of wonder. And so the minute you look at it with wonder, the minute you can feel something or think a thought or whatever, and you actually see the wonder of it, the mystery starts to become apparent. So if you just come in through something as simple as wondering, which every child knows, feels, and then you can just drop into that wonder, and as you go down into the deep mystery, there's this deep, oh. And as you keep going down, that's where this, what I call a deep knowing, a gnosis, starts arising. You start knowing something which is before words. And then what arises from that deep knowing is the recognition of what I call the deep self, this self which is more than this, which is behind this self which is one with everything. And that starts to become spontaneously obvious once you've stepped out of this limitation of what you think you know. Yeah, that's still there. You still haven't forgotten where you are and who's, your story's still there. If you didn't have that, you'd be actually, you go mad, you'd be lost. But suddenly there's this huge depth. And in this place, this is like waves, if you like, where it's all happening in life. And then there's this very still place in the depths, which is utterly mysterious. When you contact that, there's this oneness with everything. And then you see again this paradox. Hang on the surface of life here, everything's separate, I'm separate, I'm discriminating everything. And yet, as I sink back into this deep not knowing, that discrimination dissolves and it's all one. And I'm one. And there's one of us. There's one being appearing as many beings. That's cool. And from that, the thing which is for me the most important, it comes this deep love. This love of being. Because the love is how the oneness feels. So when little Tim suddenly goes, whoa, there's a connection with everything and everyone which rises up in Tim as love. Suddenly from being numb or from being like this, just seeing so little, I feel like I've expanded without limits, and I love without limits. I just love being. I love being Tim, but I love being in the form of the tables and the chairs and the ceiling and the plants and the other people, and just there's a fundamental love and connectedness. And for me, that's what this awakening is all about. It's feeling the love, because that's what changes this. When you feel the love and you bring the love to this, then life becomes worth living. You know, an awful lot of, historically especially, and I hear it a lot these days, this idea that you have to get rid of the separateness, get rid of the separate self, dissolve the ego which is out to get you and all this stuff. I really want to articulate a very different approach. That doesn't feel right to me. It feels a lot of spiritual teachings strike me as anti-life. They don't even recognize they are necessarily. But if you look at them carefully, they're anti our humanity, as if it's some mistake. It's all a meaningless illusion. The separate self is not really there. It's just an obstacle in your way. I don't see it like that. For me, it feels the opposite. For me, I look at it and it feels, no. The oneness, the field of being, is becoming conscious by arising as these separate beings. That's how it can become conscious, because consciousness is the duality of subject and object. Consciousness is this, not that. Everything I'm conscious of, I'm separating from everything else. So through consciousness and through separateness, the one is actually conscious of itself. So rather than it being something which is in the way, it feels like, no, this isn't some big mistake. This is the vehicle through which we can become conscious at all. Now the problem is, we get sucked into just the separateness, into just the story, into the knowing, and we miss the mystery. But because we're now conscious, there's the chance, if we pay it attention, that we can also be conscious of the mystery. But not instead, but as well. So that the separate self, the ego, the dance of life, the dream of life, whatever you call it, that's not an obstacle. It's actually it's the foundation from which we arise. And therefore it's something to be celebrated. And for me, rather than it all dissolving and becoming meaningless, it suddenly becomes full of meaning and delight too, to meet another being who's both separate and not separate from me, to feel the love, to just sense breathing, and anything becomes something to appreciate, not something to dismiss. And I really, really, really hope, I mean my book and my whole work really, this is what it's all about for me, is that we can move to a new form of spirituality which sees the paradox that it is not separate, but it is also not just one. It's deeper than that. It is one and many at the same moment. That's the paradox. If you look at it one way, it's all one. If you look at it another way, it's all separate. And they're both real, and they're both valuable and to be celebrated. And we don't have to choose this or that. We have to understand the paradox that it's both and, not either or. Once we do that, then I think we'll have a form of spirituality which people generally will be ready to hear. Because the reason that this is still a cult thing, it's a small thing, it's existing in a little ghetto in society, is because so many very intelligent, kind people look at it, hear what it's saying, and go, that's a bit nuts. And the reason is, it is a bit nuts. It's got lost. And what we need to do, and what all of this work we're doing is about, for me, is let's create a form of spirituality which can embrace life as well as help you transcend it to the oneness, which can actually help you bring the love into life so that we can make the evolutionary journey together. We can really engage with the adventure. Let's make a form of spirituality which can engage like that with science, with this great body of knowledge, which doesn't dismiss that, which goes, no, hang on, these are what I would call paralogically complementary. These are opposite ways of seeing the same thing, which sit together, because at a deep level, the opposites sit together. Yes, we're seeing an evolution of spirituality, and it must evolve, because a lot of it is so old, it is smelling funny. It's, you know, we've imported, it seems to me what's happened here is we've had our own Western tradition, which has become calcified and lost its center. Then a whole generation have looked at that and gone, that's going nowhere. And then we've gone east, particularly to India, and we've imported a whole load of Indian religion, fairly, without real criticism, without applying the same critique that we have to the West. So we're now awash with these half-baked, half-understood Indian concepts, some of which are brilliant. I mean, I've learned so much. But some of which are also a bit old and out of date, and a lot of which are anti-life. Because, and they may be necessary at the time in the evolutionary process, but now I feel we've gone beyond them. They're mostly, let's face it, the product of celibate men living in monasteries. Well, okay, if that's, I don't feel that that's the way forward. What we need is to reinvigorate that. So that means being critical. It means being able to hold up these old ideas and go, is that right? And when I do that, a lot of them don't seem right. Shall I give you some examples?
Yes.
Here's okay, here's a killer technique which I've developed for myself to see if there's something missing in these common spiritual ideas I hear. I asked myself, would I tell that to my kids? Simple as that. Would I tell that to my kids? So, let's think. Here's my little girl. She's just coming into life, just discovering what it's about, just figuring out who she is, and I'm there going, listen, darling, it's all a meaningless illusion, and don't develop a separate self, because you don't really exist. I'm not going to say that to her. That's mad. But why not? If that's the truth, why am I going to save her the awful agony of developing an ego and then having to lose it, or getting sucked into the illusion when she could just see through it now? Why don't I do that? Because it would mess her up. Because she has to make the journey. I want her to become a separate, strong woman who can then begin the journey of awakening, if she wants to, if she's ready. But she has to come in first, because that's what's going to make her conscious, going to make her able to do that. So that can't be right. And it all comes from this either-or thinking. So it's either the ego or it's waking up to the oneness. Well, I think it's both. These opposites sit together like yin and yang. They're part of they're two aspects of the same thing, or the same thing seen in different ways. Let's find another one. I hear this one a lot. Don't think. Your mind is the enemy. It's distracting you, pulls you off. Just stop thoughts, and you'll be there. So my little girl's coming to me. Oh, you know, Dad, I'm off to school today. Well, darling, I'm very worried about this school thing, because they're going to get you thinking. And the fact is that your thoughts are what take you away from your true nature. So please, when you're at school, try desperately not to think. And so I'm not going to do that. Why not? Well, because clearly what she needs to do is learn to think. She needs to think clearly and think interesting thoughts and think in new ways and think for herself, develop her own ideas. And through that, she can become conscious, and then she might start discovering the silence within which the thoughts are arising. It's not either or, it's both and. And there's so many. Be in the moment. That's my favorite, because that gets said all the time these days. Be in the moment. And you just think, man, I spend my whole time trying to get my kids out of the moment. They're just in the moment. I'll think about tomorrow. Do your homework. You know, go to bed now. You'll be tired tomorrow. Well, if it's really just about being in the moment, why am I doing that? Am I messing them up deliberately? No. It's because they need to come into time. They're in the moment, they need to come into time. But what the problem with us is we've come in. We've made the journey. Now we're stuck in time. We're stuck in the separateness. We're stuck in the mind. We need to be reminded that there's another place to be. And so we can consciously make the journey back to that presence, that childlike essence which was there the whole time. So we can be playing in the moment like a child whilst dealing with it competently as an adult. So that we can be the silence within which the thoughts are arising and still thinking interesting thoughts. So that we can be seeing that everything is just arising as one thing and also engaging with this dance of being separate. Both. And the thing is, we're doing it already. It's already happening. We just have to recognize it. Now, as soon as we do that, all of that anti-life stuff's gone. And as soon as and it's a breath away, because most people understand this really. We haven't thought it through clearly, that's all. So if we can just develop a way of talking about this, which embraces life as it already is, then I think this will start to explode into consciousness. And then the awareness of our oneness will become familiar. And will become something which the whole of society can start to recognize rather than just these little tiny groups. One thing I do think, for sure, is that we need a new language. And we need a language which can be authentic and keep evolving. So that what I find myself doing, for instance, in my new book, The Mystery Experience, was developing a whole new way of talking about some very old insights, which avoids the assumptions that come with old ideas. So you can see it fresh, and which speak authentically to our actual experience. Now, I use words like deep awake. I talk about awakening because it feels like, well, we all experience that waking up in the morning, and then that just continues. It's like being awake, but you're aware of the depths of life as well as the surface. So it's deep awake. However, I'm also interested in ways of talking about this which avoid all of those terms, which can be just find art and immediate communications where we can talk about this in the simplest way. What we want is the simplest and the deepest at the same time. That's the paradox. That's what we want. Now, what tends to happen is we either get simple and superficial or deep and complex. What we're looking for is like, no, simple and deep. That's the Holy Grail. That's the thing. And the more that we work on this collectively, the more we can do that. And new languages and different languages, and just keep evolving, keep changing, keep moving, keep looking for the better idea. Drop your own. That's what I feel. It's like question your own ideas. I do it all the time. When you see one which is better, go for it. Once you see the mystery, the absolute mystery, everything you're expressing is relative and it's transitory and will move on. So you've got an open-ended, you're not stuck in the ideas, they're open-ended because there's the mystery. So you're constantly allowing creativity, new things to come in, new ways of seeing it. What I've loved about my adventure through life, one of my favorite things about it, is that I've seen life in so many different ways. And just when it seems like, oh, I'm getting it, you go, no, I'm not. And then a whole revolution in the way of seeing it happens. And a lot of people seem to be looking for something they can hold on to, whereas that feels like a coffin, feels like a prison. What we want, I think, is to keep it flowing so that we're always discovering something new. And that's where the excitement is. And we're doing that individually, we're doing that collectively. And as long as we stay grounded in the mystery, there's a humility in it as well, I love, because then you can meet with other people. And you're all equal. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. But now nobody knows. How do you see it? Oh, that's interesting. No, that doesn't work for me. I see it like, oh, and you can have that interplay of ideas, creative interplay of ideas, through which new ideas form. So the memes, like genes, all do their thing and give birth to all of these new philosophies and new insights, and then you see it and there's that rush of insight. Ah, got it. One of the great surprises for me on my own adventure has been that because of what I was reading and what I was taught, I got, like many people, caught up in this idea that somehow if I kept going on the spiritual journey and I went and I was holy enough or whatever it was, gave up enough things or purified myself, I don't know, somehow my humanity would go. It would be transformed and I'd become this kind of uber being who was above it all and woo. And that hasn't happened. I have stayed stubbornly Tim. And, you know, I still speak with the same voice, I have the same mannerisms, I've still got the same quirks and faults and foibles, really. They don't trouble me anywhere near as much, but they're still there. It's just, I'm just Tim, just like I've always been. What's changed is I'm okay about that. That's all right. What used to be a real troubling thing is now fine. Because I see this paradox of my nature, that there's the deep self, if you will, that just is. It's just there, and it's just embracing everything. It's a love of being, just as it is. And it's completely safe. It's safe in the same way that if you're in a dream and it's scary, you're really safe, because you're not actually in the dream. The dream is actually in you. That twist. In the same way, when you find the deep self, you're safe, because it's not in this. This is in it, like a dream. It's completely safe. And then there's Tim, and he's the opposite of that. He's not safe. Not really. He's very, very vulnerable. And he's wounded a bit, and he's a bit battered, and he's, you know, he's making his way through, and he has to find the courage to, and he has to face amazing miracles, but terrible challenges, and sometimes awful suffering, and he experiences all of the duality of life. And now it seems to me, when you find that deep safety, there's the courage to engage with how frightening the human adventure can be. And then all of those normal human reactions become poignant, become part of life. And they all play a role, you know. It's like, well, one of the other great teachings, which I hear a lot, which doesn't make any sense to me anymore, is don't be attached. So, you know, my little girl comes up to me. Would I tell that to my kids? Hi, Daddy, I love you. Don't be attached now. It's like, I don't think so. I'm not saying that. I love you too, but I'm not attached. No. Our humanity, to love is to be attached. To love is to fear. When my little girl is out and she's not home, I'm frightened. Because I love her. To love is to suffer. When my dad was dying from a stroke and couldn't move any part of his body but one arm and was in great pain, I suffered because I love. To love isn't just love is ooh and oh, and it's the thing which holds everything. So all of that, those human attachments and the suffering and the anger at the injustice and I want to feel those things, but I don't want to be lost in them. I want my humanity and I want this. And the great thing is I can have both because they both are here, right now. And they sit perfectly alongside each other. The opposites coexist. And then this becomes okay. I can make the human journey, just as it already is. I don't have to become some uber being. I don't have to constantly feel like I'm failing to be spiritual enough, that I'm not enlightened yet, that I'm only if I only meditated more, all that stuff. I can actually be Tim. And then let this love, which is my deeper nature, come through Tim as best it can. And learn how to do that more. And be on an evolutionary journey of learning what it is to love. Love when it's good, but also when it's bad. Loving in all the dark corners. Loving everywhere. What is love? Well, the line that works for me and helps me understand what love is that love is how oneness feels. Because what I notice is that when I love in a personal way, like with my wife or my daughter or my son or my mum or my friends or whoever, or a place or a thing I do, or the two become one. So that I see through the separateness. So I'm separate and not separate. So if someone I love is suffering, I suffer. If their dreams come true, I'm pleased. It's like we're both separate and not separate. And when I see that fundamental oneness, then this feeling of love is what arises. And that feels the way it is to me, but there's a whole spectrum of love. But they're all to do with the one becoming two. And yet, the two becoming one and yet remaining two. So, right from sex, where the two become one yet remain two, through romantic love, again, same thing, through love of a child, through friends, through love of what you do, through all the way back like a spectrum, and it's all one love, and that deep love is love of being. When you find the one being, and you're not separate from anything or anyone, there's a deep, deep love. But it's not a personal love. It doesn't mean, you know, that there's still, this is my little girl and that's somebody else's little girl, and my relationship with those two are different. The love is different. It's not personal in that way. And personal love seems really beautiful. So I don't feel like, oh no, get rid of all that, just have this. It's like, no, have it all, because you have it all already. Just find that the personal love is like the wave on top of the ocean, and the ocean is everywhere. The ocean is so big it embraces everybody and everything, even your enemies, even things you don't like, even things which are horrendous. Like my dad being so, you know, dying was horrendous for him and for me and for everyone. And yet love could go there. In fact, only when love went there was it bearable. And love going there didn't make it great. It didn't become all right, it was still shit. But it wasn't just shit. It was also poignant, there was deep connection, there was kind of a strange beauty to it even, because the love transfigured it. And from it, what I saw was, through that his suffering and then his death, a huge amount of love came into the world as people opened. Because of and I see that a lot. Around the most terrible suffering, huge amount of love can come into the world. Because it's not just good or bad, it's both good and bad all the time. It's both. Most of our problems, it seems to me, arise because we see one of the poles of the paradox without the other. So if we are suffering, then it's usually because we're stuck in what's wrong. And it's so wrong that we're stuck in it. And that can be purely psychological, it can be physical, usually it's both. If you open up, if instead of trying to get rid of that, you pay attention to the thing you're missing, then it changes, because it's no longer just this. So if there's the suffering, and there's the story about what's happening and how bad it is, and but then if you find the mystery, if you see, I don't know what life is. I don't know this is bad. I mean, actually, who hasn't in their life many times found that good things come from bad things? This may be the best thing that's ever happened. You don't know what it is. And then suddenly there's space around it, and you're aware of the mystery. You're aware that there's a joy simply in being, actually, even when there's suffering. And if you come right into the moment out of time, it just is. And suddenly everything just, oh, it just is. It just is. And there's the love of it, of the being. Suffering's still there, actually. But now it's in this big space. Sometimes it feels to me like perspective. Do you know what I mean? If I take my hand, and there's my suffering, and the world is just suffering. The world is, but if I just, whoa, hang on, it's still there. It's still exactly what it was. It hasn't changed. It's just I can see a whole load else as well. And you start seeing, there's beauty everywhere, even the most terrible places. There's exquisite beauty. There's never just good or bad. It's always both. That's the nature of duality. It's always both. And the mystery is the key to that. The mystery, seeing you don't know, allows the possibility of seeing it in a new way. And then there's this great relief as you come into just the presence of being. And in that place, you just know that it's okay. I mean, I know it can sound banal, that, but you do. If you come into the deep mystery, the deep knowing, if you tried to articulate it, it would be something like, everything's okay. It's all right. It's like you're safe. It's all right to make the journey, even the hard bits. And when you know that, then you have courage. Because, you know, life is scary. Anyone who's not scary, is scared of life, hasn't been paying attention, it seems to me. Because it's like so much bad stuff happens. But when you see this as well, there's courage. It's not, I hear people a lot talk about, you know, don't have any fear. That seems crazy to me. And I teach myself, again, would I say that to my kids? I teach my kids fear. Don't go on the road, you could get hurt. Don't get picked up by strangers, you don't know what that are. I teach them fear. so they can be safe. If they had no fear, they'd die. But if you have this deep safety as well, you have courage. No fear is foolhardy. Fear and this deep safety, that's courage. That enables you to live in this world of scary things with love. And that seems more interesting to me, and more realistic, more authentic. My own feeling is that any form of spirituality which cannot harmonize it with deep science is finished. It's finished. Science is so powerful. It's achieved all of this. And it's the greatest achievement of the human imagination, without doubt. So any form of spirituality will be redundant unless it can understand how it fits with science. And the good thing is, it fits perfectly. Now, let me be clear. Fluffy, superstitious spirituality does not fit with reductionist, materialist, narrow science. They are never going to fit. But deep spirituality and deep science, these fit perfectly. The problem with a lot of science is the same which has happened with religion. There's this deep spirituality, but what most people have got is religion, which is superstitious nonsense. With science, there's this deep science, which is incredible, but what most people have got is an outdated, reductionist, materialist idea that science is going, look, it's just this, and whereas actually, of course, science is saying the opposite. It's going, this doesn't exist. That reductionist, materialist view of science has been outdated for 150 years. Certainly 100 years, since the quantum physicists have gone. These guys, the greatest minds of their time, clearly going, there is no such thing as matter as we understand it. So that's finished. And this reductionism, which you see everywhere, which goes, it's just. So you were talking about emotions. So you're in love, but that's just chemicals in your body. So what, if you showed me a chemical chart, I'd feel love? No. It's not like that. But clearly it's something to do with the chemicals in my body, but it's not just, it is the chemicals in my body, but it's not just the chemicals in my body. It is also a whole lot more. And in the same way, this is matter, but it's not just matter, it's also a whole load more. So the reductionists do that to reality and try to understand it by reducing it like this. The superficial spirituality is just off in la-la land, really, and that's never going to fit with any of them. But there's also reductionist spirituality, especially around non-dualism. A lot of non-duality is reductionist in the same way that materialist science is reductionist, because it goes, it's just an illusion. It's just all one. But it's not just all one. It is also all one. It is also all many. Clearly. Just look. It's obvious. What could be more obvious? And what I see is that it's like reductionist science destroys life by cutting it up into smaller and smaller pieces until it's all gone. And reductionist non-duality destroys life by sucking it all into one big oneness until it's one meaningless blob and it's all gone. And claims to have explained it somehow. But it hasn't. It hasn't done anything. It's just reduced it to nothing. What we want is what I call a paralogical approach, which is this both and, sees the paradox of the situation, so that it's not just, it's also. Now, if you take a deep spirituality and a deep science, which is being articulated by people like Niels Bohr and Schrödinger and Einstein and all of these great men and women, and put it with a deep science, a deep spirituality, they fit perfectly, because one of them is what happens if we go outwards objectively into the world and look at it. And one of them is what happens if we go subjectively within the self and look at it. And in both cases, what you end up with is that there is a field of being, which is the mystery, of which we don't know what it is, but we know that it is. And it is arising in all of these separate forms. And through the evolution of the forms, it has become conscious. So that there are centers of consciousness arising within the field of being. Now, if you talk about that in scientific terms, that would be an energy field, which arises as matter, which then forms these bodies become conscious, boop, it's now conscious and the universe is looking at itself. If you talk about spirituality, you come back into yourself, you go, oh, there's a self, there's a deep awareness, oh, there's one awareness within which everything's arising as a dream, it's imagining itself to be all these forms, and through the forms it imagines itself to be, it is now conscious. But these are basically the same thing from two different perspectives. There's a fundamental unconscious oneness, and it's unconscious because it's not separate. Because separateness is consciousness. Without the separation, without a subject and an object, it's unconscious, which is arising as these separate subjects. So here we are, we're different subjects arising in the one field of being. Are we separate? Yeah. But we are also, on a deeper level, we're all the field. We're all the field of being. And the awakening is about coming back into it and going, oh yeah, I'm the oneness as a center of being, meeting you, who is also the oneness arising as that center of being. How delicious. We're different and we're not at the same time. Fantastic. What a great effect. One of the things which a lot of the debate between science and spirituality can get bogged down in is the nature of the brain, really, and consciousness. What's the relationship between those two? And the honest truth is we don't know. But if you look at it with this paralogical insight, I think it can really help. Because there's a tendency to think that somehow that our essence is inside this, or particularly inside this. That consciousness is arising, there's an epiphenomena or something, from this, some side effect of this complex piece of meat. And then you look inside and go, well, where is it then? So if you undo it and you look around inside, you don't find any consciousness, you don't find any ideas, all you find is porridge and neurons and stuff. So what's going on? I want to offer us it's a very simple analogy. I hope it's not a bland one. I hope it's an interesting one. And I think it points to something deep. It's only an analogy. What strikes me is that right now, I am sitting in a field of music. The air is full of radio waves. Every type of music. There's all happening. It's all going on. But it's all silent. Can't hear any of it. The music, the field of music is silent. But take a radio, put some power in it, some energy, tune it in, and poof, you hear the music. And suddenly there's a bubble of sound within the silent field. But the music's not in the radio. You can take the radio to bits and you're not going to find the music. The music's everywhere. But we needed the radio to hear it. And it feels like this thing, this glorious body thing, is like the radio. The awareness isn't in it, but it is allowing this pocket, this bubble of consciousness to arise within the unconscious field. So that this wonderful play of appearances suddenly becomes conscious, goes boo, and there it is. And we're like these centers of consciousness, and where we go, it goes. And these little, and we meet each other and pop into each other's bubbles. And but it's not in us, it's not in this, it's coming through this. This is allowing the thing which is everywhere to know that it is. The tendency, of course, is we just identify with the thing it's coming through. Oh, well, it's coming because of Tim, so I'm this. Well, that's true in one way, for sure. But there's also a deeper side to that, which is no, this is allowing the thing which is to be conscious that it is. And I feel that approach is congruent with both the deep spirituality, which I've written about and studied, and what I understand of the deep science which has emerged over the last 100 years. That's the way we can understand this and bring these two together. There's something, it seems to be that consciousness is reflective. So you look at it one way and the field's doing everything. Because you look at it one way, there is only the field. So everything is arising and changing and moving as one thing. And then consciousness is watching it happen. It's like, am I doing this talking? Well, I'm not thinking about it and then saying it, it's just happening. So where's it coming from? Is it me? It's hard to say. It's just, and then as there have been these great studies which have shown that the body and the whole, everything is reacting quicker than you're aware of it. And I had a thing just recently where I was walking along by a long wall, a ball came over, I jumped out of the way of the ball, and then I registered, a ball has come over. But I'd already moved. And when you're at your most competent, I mean, when you see a footballer just, they're not, it's not time to, we mistake being conscious for thinking about it. But actually there's just a flow. When we're at our best, when we're playing music, when we're talking well, when things happen, everything just flows. But what consciousness does is it gives us the chance to intervene with the flow. Consciousness slows things down so that we can think about it, which is imagining things to happen which aren't happening. Or questioning. So I'm going to say this next, and then I'm thinking, do you know what, that's not a good idea, I'll stop and I'll say this. And at that point, the one, through being conscious of itself as this one, has changed what it's doing. So most of what oneness is doing is unconscious, isn't it? It's being the floor unconsciously. It's being the chair unconsciously. It's being the sky unconsciously. And then you and I, it's doing it consciously, or at least semi-consciously. Which means that through the conscious reflection, it has the ability to choose to do something else. This is why it drives me mad when you hear people saying that choice is an illusion. It's like, no, choice is, again, it's a great achievement. It's taken 13.5 billion years to get us to the point where we can make conscious choices. Stones aren't making conscious choices. This is why evolution is speeding up. The more conscious the universe has become, the more it can make conscious choices. So it can evolve consciously, not unconsciously. Now it can really start to move. And if we do that, if we get more conscious, make better choices, it'll move faster and faster and faster. And those choices is watching it just happen and then intervening. Actually stepping in and going, no, that way. Learning, all of that. That's the ability. And now, who's doing that? Well, ultimately, it's the one doing that. No, there's nothing else. So the one is, through the someone, is choosing consciously rather than unconsciously. And that seems to me something to be embraced wholeheartedly. Just to make a priority. Personal choice is the same thing as impersonal choice, because we are both the impersonal and the personal. When I choose to say this, not that, the one, the field, is choosing through Tim to say this, not that. And so which is it? Is it Tim or the field? Well, it's the field as Tim. These are the same thing. So it's both personal. I experience it as personal because I'm a person here. But the field, which is impersonal, is arising like the wave and doing that. And so it depends on, these things, these paradoxes just depend where you stand. And there's not one or the other which is true. They're both true. So you stand in the personal, it's personal. You stand in the impersonal, it's impersonal. Stand far enough back and everything's happening as one, like a wave. Come into the separateness and everything's little particles. And one of the things I love about quantum physics is that discovery that the very nature of what is, of light, of everything, is both a wave and a particle, depending on how you look at it. Not this or that, not a wave. It's not, see, then quantum physicists are not going, it's not particles, it's really a wave. That's what a lot of non-dualists are doing, it seems to me. What they're saying, it's both. It's both particles if you look at it one way, and it's a wave if you look at it another way. And those coexist. And that's what's happening here, I think. So it's personal and it's impersonal at the same time. I really feel we need a revolutionary approach to this, to awakening. One that goes with the science, one which is clear, speaks a new language, and can reach humanity in general. And my contribution to that has been my new book, The Mystery Experience. But that's arisen from my direct practice of being with people on my these weekend retreats I do. And they just astonish me how quickly and easily just about anyone, 90% more of people, can step into it over the course of just a few days, and not just get it and go, oh yeah, I get it, but just get it so it's just in you feel it in every cell of your body. I mean, it's not like, yeah, I feel love, it's like, whoa, it's wow, it's something strong, it's something exciting, it's not just that, it's also calm, but it is also passionate, it's both. And you feel it, especially when you're not used to it, when it's new, it's a big thing. And that's really intrigued me, that it's so easy. And I thought, what's happened? And you know the key, I think, is this both and. Once people get that this is okay, that their humanity is the way it should be, that they haven't failed, that they're good enough, there's nowhere to reach, something happens. And there's a relief. Oh, hang on. And there's a relief also, I think, when things make sense. And this both and makes sense, because it fits with our actual experience in a way that when things don't actually fit with your experience, they partially do, you get dragged off somewhere and you think it's working, and then something's nagging you, no, it's not right. But when you just go, oh yeah, I see, it's very simple, I get it, there's such a relaxation and a letting go that this just goes, boo, oh, and then that little presence, like a little child within, just is there. Wow, life. I'm alive. And there's that love of it. I'm alive and I love it. And it's a breath away. It is. It's a breath away. And when you have that, then you're able to more easily engage with the times which aren't like that, which are tough. And we all have that too. And then you can go back to your life and make the journey, make the adventure, as it already is. And it's a hell of an adventure, isn't it?